the concept of an MSP. So what exactly is an MSP? Actually, before we even talk about that, let's talk about what art is and why we should think about art like a startup. So when we talk about, I'm also a wanderer, so I apologize in advance. So when working with companies, actually I probably should say so. Forgot I was being recorded, I was like, I should probably stand still.
It's all right.
So when working with companies, everyone has, a fantastic idea they want to put out in the market, usually something that their mom did for them as a kid that they want to try to make money off of. And they want to put something out there and they want to get it out there, they want to make the next big Facebook or the next Apple or whatever, Snapchat or Duolingo or Pets.com, I don't know. And so they want to put something out there and they're not really sure exactly how to do it, but they know they've got a great idea and they know they just want to get it out in the public, they want to see what's going on. And so usually when that happens, we'll come in and we'll talk about, great, who's your target audience? Why are you putting this out in the marketplace? How do you know you'll be successful? How do you know you can repeat those things? Usually the answer is they have no clue, which is why they come to us for help. And as I was continuing to build products, I kept thinking that, wow, the product life cycle that we build for building out apps and databases and applications is exactly the same process we do when we create art. So everything you do from creating a burlesque act, to creating a pole act, to writing a novel, to creating a song, it's the same damn process. And if these broses can create this stuff and get it out there and get feedback and get something out into the marketplace that may not be perfect, that's a little dirty and grimy, but it's usable enough and you can get that feedback to make it another product, why the hell can't we? So that's the purpose of what we call at work an MVP, a minimal viable product. Here for us as artists, we're calling it an MSP, a minimal stage-ready product.
Aww.
So it's slightly different because it's not just a minimal viable product. You need to have a little bit of polish on it. So it's a minimal stage-ready product. One thing that we'll also find is that at work we tend to use a lot of acronyms. So I'm going to try my very best not to use acronyms. My very best. But I will break that rule through one. And that's BUMP. That's build, understand, measure, perform. Those are the 4 categories of things that you need to do as you build a product. And I'm calling every one of our acts, all of our songs, all of our work, all of our paintings, they're all products. So the first thing we do when we want to talk about building a product is you want to build it. And building it takes the form of a number of ways. I know a lot of us kind of just get into a space where we have to feel like we're inspired. We feel like we need this creation, just hit me at the multiply me. No, actually, you don't. The same way when we build a product, we do something called a comparative and a competitive analysis. So what does that mean? We look to see what else is in the marketplace. And we look to see what's missing, and we look to see what we can do better than someone else. The exact same thing happens. So when I'm building an act, for example, I build a lot of acts when I know I'm performing in Chicago that are a bit more classic, that are easy to use both on stage and off, and have some sort of slightly gimmicky element to it. How do I know that? Because those are the things that book in Chicago. And how do I know that those are the things that book in Chicago? I've gone to shows. I've talked to performers. I've talked to producers. Did I mention I've gone to shows? So you do all of those things and you create a competitive and comparative analysis and you look to see what is there in the marketplace that I can either make better or that you're not finding at all. And that's where you start. And so now that you've created that competitive analysis, then you look to see, well, who exactly am I building this act for? And yes, when you build your act, you build your product, you always want to have yourself and your heart into it. And you always want it to be an expression of you. But at the same time, you also want to make sure that it has an audience. Because you can create the most, the most serious piece that just speaks to your soul and nobody wants to see it. No one cares. And we all know we've been in those open mic spaces, we've been in those comedy nights, we've been at those shows where someone is just doing all of the things. And This really should have been between you and your therapist. Really should have been. So you do want to look at what the marketplace also looks like. Now that's not to say you should only create art for the marketplace, because you absolutely shouldn't. Don't be a Jeff Koons. Don't do that. Oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah. I have a lot of feelings about that. We can talk about that later. But you want to balance the two of those out. So you want to know who you're voting it for. You want to know what the marketplace demands. And so once you've created that, you now know, okay, cool. Here are some of the parameters I have, and here's how I can start to build this app. That's where the fun and creativity comes in. Now that you've done all of that, now you get to do the fun part of actually creating the act. So now that you've kind of built it, you can now go into the you or the understanding part. And now here's where you start to think about, well, what does this mean? Like, why am I doing this? And I think that's where we as artists actually have the most fun, is in the why. Why are you creating this piece? And it's very simple to create something that's like, look, I know I get booked a few times a week in shows in Chicago, and so I know this is the stuff they're looking for, so I'm just going to put some stuff on stage because I know that's what they're looking for. That's super boring. You're going to start hating it after a while, and you're not going to want to do it. And trust me, the audience can tell. Yeah. The audience can tell when you were dead behind the eyes because you don't care. So when you're now in the kind of you section, the understand section, you're now at a point where you're like, why am I doing this? What is important to me about that, and why is that important? And that is a lot of kind of self-reflection. Frankly, Marina's talk actually covered a lot of that part. I was super tickled as I heard your speech. I was like, they work together. But yes, please take all of those things. So I'll save time. Take all of those things and fully understand the intentional why of what you're creating. Because if you fully understand the intentional why of what you're creating, you will have a better and more successful product. And again, so you've now spoken to your marketplace. You now kind of understand where you are. You've now understood why you're doing this. So we now then move into the M, or the measure part of it. So now you understand what you're doing. You've created this act. It's absolutely fantastic. You can do fantastic twirls or whatever you can do. How do you know this has been successful? How do you know you've gotten what you want out of this? You know, if you've decided you want this act, you want to see this act on this very specific stage, or you want to take this act on the road, or this is an act that you want to highlight and showcase a new skill, how do you know that's been successful? You need to create some metrics. You need to measure that. And measurement could be something as simple as, I want to be able to perform this act at least once this year. That's a metric. That's something that's easily achievable, it's identifiable, it's something that you can actually put a pin in and say, hey, I've done this. And then you can also take those metrics, and even if it's something that's a little bit more esoteric, you can still put numbers around that also. Like, for example, for me, one of my goals this year was to headline a festival. That's super nebulous. How does one do that? Well, you have to make sure you have a body of work. You have to make sure that people see you. You have to make sure that people know who you are. You have to make sure you actually have work that's like worth it. And all of those things, and you also need to be able to have like reps. Like, you have to have performed this act enough that you have the comfortability to be on stage to present yourself as a headliner. I'm also very happy to say that in August I will be headlining the Ohio Burlesque. So yes, you can put metrics around those things, and also sometimes as a performer, sometimes those metrics are reps. Like, how many states do you want to perform in? How many cities do you want to perform in? How many times do you want to perform? Are you someone with a full-time job and a performance career, so you can't really perform at the same level who's a full-time performer? That's fine, but what does that look like for you? So let's have some numbers around that performance itself. Moving finally to our last piece, perform. So now that you've done all of those things, you've created an act, you know why you're doing it, you know what you want to get out of it, you know how you've been successful. Actually, here comes the hardest part. When do I know that I'm actually ready to put this on stage? And if you're anything like me, you get to a point where you're super duper nervous and you're like, every single piece of this has to be perfect, every rhinestone has to be in place, every single has to be sewn. I had to practice this act 9,000 times. Oh my God, my foot did this, this. I can't. I'm never. This is not happening. That's when you get into your MSP, Minimum StageReady Product. How do you know you get your feedback? Get it down on stage. That if you know that you've done all of the work, you know that you have an intentional why and why you're doing the product, if you know who your audience is, if you know where this could fit in, if you've done the work of reaching out to find out who those people are and you've made those connections, not everything has to be fully perfect. And that's one thing we talk about a lot at work is that when you're building an app, you don't have to have every single feature in the app. What you need to have is everything that you need to answer the question that you're trying to ask. And for us as performers, do you need to have the fanciest costume? No. Do you need to have all of your choreography perfectly tight? No. What you need to do is get it to a point where you can get it on stage and get that feedback. And we as performers, we actually have something super magical that frankly people pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for. I know, I see the bills. And that's for immediate feedback. Clients pay so much money to get feedback and to get metrics and analytics. However, we as performers, we get that feedback as soon as we do something. We'll get the laughs, we'll get the gasps, you'll get the boredom, you'll get the bar queens where you're like, oh, cool, I'm gonna go get a drink. That's feedback. They want to listen to life. But those are all of the things that we get immediately, and we can start to tell every time we put something on stage, even if it's not perfect, you can tell in real time what's working and what isn't. And then you take that feedback, which is powerful, and you can say, hey, you know what? That one reveal I didn't really get what I was hoping for out of it, or that one trick I did, everyone lost their shit. And so that's the one thing that you make sure you keep in the act itself. And so now that you've had that piece of feedback, you can now take that feedback and redump it back into your act. And you can go through the process all over again. And the beauty of us as performers is we get the opportunity to run this cycle every single time we put something on stage. So we end up creating acts that are polished, that are beautiful, that are powerful in a fraction of the time that anyone from Silicon Valley, Silicon Prairie, Silicon whatever, insert Silicon place in the United States, would ever create. You know, companies are excited if they can get the kind of feedback that we get out of 4 shows in 6 months. And they're like, cool, we got this round of feedback with this user test after 6 months, this is great. We could literally put an act on stage and get feedback and know if that act works or not the very first time that we do it. And that, frankly, is something that as we understand and harness the power of how we do that, frankly, you unlocked the code of what people in Silicon Valley have been trying to unlock for decades. And we do it every single time. That is so damn powerful. Congratulations, y'all. Go start.